talk a little bit about some of the Christmas-related stories that follow on, at least a little bit from that. In that case, you might wonder, so why am I talking about light bulb moments? You might be thinking, am I going to do light bulb jokes? I thought about it. I thought I wouldn't really, but then I thought of one that I like that I've never told, so I'm just going to do one joke. And that's very generic ones. How many people does it take to change a light bulb? And the scientific answer is, well, it depends, but not as many as you need to change a heavy one. Where's the drummer? I've written. That's not good. Anyway, so the reason for light bulb jokes, of course, light bulb moments, is that today, or yesterday actually, in the church calendar, the churches that follow that, the 6th of January is known as the Feast of Epiphany, the time when Christ is revealed to the Gentiles, when God's glorious salvation is declared and demonstrated to be way beyond his people Israel, but to all the world. And that's through the coming to see Jesus of the wise men, the magi, as we might call them. And that's sort of in the church calendar, the sequence of things that's been known then as Epiphany. And if you look that up in a dictionary, you might find some that talk about it as being the celebration of this religious feast day. But it's a word that's entered into common usage as well to mean a sudden great revelation and realization, a light bulb moment, if you like. And so there's a few of those that I want to talk about today. And before I get on to really what I want to encourage us with this morning, I should just perhaps comment that the picture we often have from nativity scenes and Christmas cards of three wise men coming on camels to the stable on the very night of Jesus' birth, along with the shepherds and the little drummer boy and all those other people that are part of it, isn't necessarily what happened. To start with, why am I even talking about this today? Haven't we got Christmas out of the way already? But the passage that we're going to read in a moment begins with after. And we don't know how long after. It might have been a few weeks. It might have been months. It could have been up to even a couple of years after the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. That these wise men, whether there were three or more, we don't know. They say three because there were three gifts that were brought, but there might have been more of them. But these people came and found Jesus and began to worship. What we do know about this group is that they travelled a long way, and they did so in response to something significant that got their attention. And when they arrived, they did something important, their own light bulb moment that we can learn from. If you want to follow along at all, I'm reading from Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least amongst the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and he said, "Go and make a careful search for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they'd heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they'd seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. And on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Then when Herod saw that he'd been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged, and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the Magi. So as I said, this part of the Christmas story, that sort of the birth of Jesus, has a number of actions and reactions from which we can draw some lessons. And to begin with, these wise men, they had a light bulb moment in that they saw a sign, and not perhaps that sign, more like this sign, a star. And when they saw the sign, they took action. Now, we don't know if they were especially looking for a sign. There's some that, we'll talk about them as astrologers or astronomers trying to look and discern messages from the sky, whether that's true or they were just, wise leaders and the star came to their attention. However it happened, the light in the sky was for them a first light bulb moment, a sign significant enough that they chose to act upon the sign. They didn't just comment to each other and say, "Oh, how interesting. Have you ever seen anything like that before?" They didn't just comment on the fascinating elements of this, they acted on it. And now, I'm guessing, but I don't expect that they had, a bunch of pre-packed camels ready to go. They probably had to spend some time getting ready. They had to rearrange their schedules, say goodbye to family and friends and set off. Do we do the same when there's some significant sign that perhaps draws our attention in life? Or is it all too hard and we really do nothing until the sign fades and we find that we maybe saw something interesting, but we took no action? It wasn't really a light bulb moment from us. The first question perhaps for us today is there anything that's preventing us from following the signs that God has placed in our life? Another thing about these people, and the old joke is that they must be wise men because they stopped to ask for directions, is that they did stop and ask for directions when they were unsure. And again, for us, perhaps the lesson is if we're seeking after God and we're not quite sure of the way, do we ever ask for help? Do we ever ask for directions? And who do we ask? Or do we just find it hard, perhaps lose our way, get distracted, or turn and go back home? But eventually they made it, and they stopped when they found Jesus. The Bible talks about him as the author and finisher of our faith, and we should be careful, perhaps sometimes, not to ever think we outgrow Jesus, because, we don't. But I know I've talked before that sometimes people, they think they've been a Christian for a long time and they think they've got to find some deeper thing. And deeper things might be all right if you're sort of staying around the person and work of Jesus, but often people go off on tangents here, there and everywhere because they think, well, we've done all that, we've heard all that. Haven't you preached on this 2 or 3 years before? In a way, I should be preaching about some of the same things every 2 or 3 years to a new bunch of people as we invite others in. Something I'm really looking forward to starting to ramp up in this next year when we've renovated this place, that we would have different events and things to which we can invite people to come and know Jesus for themselves. But on this journey of coming to Jesus, when we come to Jesus, we need to learn from what they did when they stopped, because that's the greatest light bulb moment for us to take away from this. That this significant event that prompted an action from them prompted a great reaction from them and in them when they came to actually meet the person of Jesus. And we read that it says, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Of all the actions we take, this is the most important action, and it should be a reaction to us, understanding the goodness and glory of Jesus. How do we unfold that for one another? It will be different for everybody. There are some people that love songs and music, and others that just doesn't quite connect with them, but it doesn't mean that they can't worship if we can find what it is that does connect to them. Maybe it's some story, some picture, some experience that they would have. Just think about it. You might all, go and see the same, movie or thing going on. It would affect us differently. But worship, and I plan later this year to do a series of 5 or 6 talking about worship, is our response to seeing the glory of God unfolded before us. And however it was, this glorious child revealed to them the wonder of God, and these wise men bowed down and worshipped him. And in fact, we heard from the beginning of the story when they said they were looking for him to worship him. What a great intent. Often people can be looking for something to somehow make their lives better, easier, to provide an answer, to provide some resource that they might need or want. We can even treat coming to Jesus like that sometimes. But ultimately, we should be coming to him to worship him, as did the wise men, who humbled themselves and bowed down in their actions and their attitudes. They gave honour and glory to an infant that they somehow recognised was Emmanuel, God with us. What a light bulb moment for them. Remember the name, the epiphany, the revelation, the realisation. They had some light bulb moments as their reaction to the events of this story unfolded. But there were some other people in this story who had kind of different light bulb moments, not ones that I would call an epiphany. For example, Herod's light bulb moment, he just felt threatened. Wasn't much of a light bulb moment for him at all. Might have been a realisation that his position was threatened. And it's true. Jesus threatens all of our positions. If our position is something we want to hold on to as one of power and control, instead of approaching him with surrender. When we allow Jesus to take his rightful place, we can no longer be the ruler of our own little kingdom. So he perhaps had a realisation of that, but it wasn't a light bulb moment that was a revelation of how good that could be for him. The other people in this story who had their own light bulb moment were just the people of Jerusalem. And their light bulb moment was pretty much, it seems, just to ignore it. They responded with indifference or with apathy. It seems that there were many who knew that Bethlehem was going to be the prophesied place of the Messiah's birth. And you think when these wise men came seeking for that because they'd seen a sign, some others might think, oh, yes, they've seen a sign. It seems to be pointing to Bethlehem, where we know the Messiah is going to come from. Let's go along with them and discover about this. But no, we don't hear of a great crowd joining them, going along to be a part of it at all. Why they didn't take their cue from the Magi and go along, I don't know. Perhaps it just seemed unreal. All the day-to-day stuff of going to the market, of lessons they had, of even perhaps their routine of worship. Whatever those things were too much every day and wrapped up their lives so much that the idea of the Messiah being nearby just seemed to fall through their fingers. So it's important for us to not respond as Herod did, despite the truth that Jesus does threaten our own little kingdoms, nor as the townspeople of Jerusalem with apathy and ignorance. Our response should be the reaction that the wise men had, their epiphany, the response of awe to the one they came to, where they bowed down and worshipped him. And part of that worship, and when I preach about worship again, I'll talk about this some more, worship is showing the worth that you give. And they brought their treasures with a worth that was obviously not enough to in any way match the worth of the child they came to, but a symbol for them of that worship: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And there's much symbolism in this. Gold can often be said to talk about Jesus' divinity, and myrrh about his humanity, because it was used to anoint the dead. And incense, of course, his sacrificial life. But while these things speak very much of Jesus, they can also speak to us of how we might respond what reaction we can have to meeting the person of Jesus. The costliness of gold, I guess, is obvious to us. We could say that perhaps them bringing gold represents our bringing of monetary wealth to God. And yes, as a church, we need money to see things happen. Someone once said, how much, ministry do you get for $100? Well, I don't know. I don't know what's $100 worth of ministry. That's a strange thing to say. That's why you'll hear me sometimes pray that God would multiply what we give and see lives changed. But I think more than just it symbolising that we bring perhaps some monetary worth to God, I think it's just this generosity of heart, not holding on to those things that otherwise would just benefit us and being willing to give them, that God desires as our worship. As you'll hear me say, we give not because God wants to get from us, but because God wants us to join him in his giving. Another of the gifts that they brought that is one of the reactions that hopefully when we have our light bulb moment of who Jesus is, will be that there will be a welling within us of wanting to communicate, to commune, to share ourselves with Jesus. And frankincense was used in the temple services when they would be doing their prayers. In Revelation we read, when he had taken the book, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. So if we're to copy the wise men, we need to bring our own incense to him, our prayers. And no, incense isn't just a short-lived blazing flame. If you think about incense, it's not actually really a flame at all. It lingers as it burns through and the aroma and the smell and the smoke arises. Sometimes we can be excited about, the fire this and the fire that, and there's plenty of worship songs about that, perhaps. But are our prayers not just a little shopping list given every now and then, but some time lingering in God's presence, mentioning before him his goodness, his impact on our lives? That can be a challenge to us. It's a challenge to me, I know, at times. But might all of us seek to have that response, that reaction to the person of Jesus, that our prayers would be like incense. And then myrrh, perhaps a bit more uncomfortable than some others, that in a way signifies our willingness to be crucified with Christ. It was used, it was collected from some trees, and it hardened into this dark crystal. It was a very valuable substance at the time. It was used in perfumes and in anointing oils that were used in embalming the dead. An unusual thing to give a baby, but prophetically it speaks of the costly death by which Jesus wins our salvation. And Paul writes in Galatians about being crucified with Christ, saying, it's no longer I that live, but Christ who lives in me. To be crucified with Christ is not then to have no life at all. In fact, it's to have a true, full and rich life, as that life is lived with Christ living in and through us. As we bring myrrh, a sign that we're willing to say that to Jesus, no longer I that live, but Christ who lives in me. This, fairly short sermon really today, I hope still has some ongoing impact for us. As there was an ongoing impact in the sense that when the Gentile Magi came, it was this beginning sign of a whole new chapter and episode in God's story of salvation. As the angels declared, this was to all a sign. Jesus was to all mankind. Despite coming from a distance, despite there probably being some difficulty involved and even danger, meeting this angry guy Herod, they realised there was danger in going back to him without giving him what he wanted, and they went off another way. Despite those things, they had their epiphany, their revelation and realisation as they met and worshipped Jesus. As the card on the picture says, let us be like the wise men and worship him.